Hello and welcome to this is going to be 22 of Creative Dynamos. Today I have with me Dave Dobson. Dave and I met at Big Lick Comic Con. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to do an on-site interview, but actually that's good because we get to do a longer sit-down interview, and I got to do a little bit of research, which unveiled all kinds of fun facts about Dave. Dave, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. Before we get into the total package that is Dave Dobson, why don't you tell me a little bit about you're a writer. Tell me how long have you been writing and what kind of got you started down that path?
Yeah, well, I have always enjoyed writing stories. I recently moved and my basement was full of things I'd written in elementary school and junior high and all of that. I was a professional geologist for a lot of my life up until recently. And I started writing novels, about 20 years ago. I had one novel that I wrote on and off for about 14 years. So I think that's the first sort of published novel length thing that I've done. And then I've been writing pretty intensely since about 2019 and exclusively as my main gig since about 2021. I did have a children's book traditionally published back in 1996. So that was also cool. On endangered species.
So what inspires you to start writing?
I love stories. The first novel I worked on was a sort of a fantasy detective story. I like sort of mysteries and cop shows and that kind of thing. And I also love fantasy and sci-fi. So I thought, why not do a sort of detective story in a fantasy setting? And so that was my first novel, Flames of the Frost Dome. And I've done a couple more in that series and then branched out to sci-fi and contemporary mysteries. But yeah, it's really just the kind of the excitement of telling a story the way I want to and putting all kinds of stupid jokes and that kind of thing in my books. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. You and I have some things in common then, because I love a good mystery and I have my own supernatural detective fiction as well as a science fiction series that's very mystery kind of, not necessarily, I wouldn't put it in the mystery genre, but there's definitely a mystery element to books that I've gotten in that series so far. So that's, who are some of your favorite fictional detectives?
Oh, boy. I guess the number of books I've written most have been Jack Reacher's stories. I don't know if he's a detective as much as a giant guy who goes on books. But I love Dick Francis books. I don't know if you've read any of PNC. Wrote a whole bunch of mysteries surrounding horse racing.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he was a professional jockey, and then he and his wife, he said after she died that she had been responsible for a lot of his books too. But he and his wife wrote this series of mysteries. Usually a couple of them had recurring characters or main characters, but a lot of them were just different people who were normally kind of just normal folks involved in horse racing in some way who ended up on the wrong end of a conspiracy or something like that. So I really love those books. My wife introduced me to those. So yeah, as far as detectives, those are the ones I think I'm closest. I've watched the TV show Bosch. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, I love Bosch.
Yeah, that's a lot of people talk about that as sort of middle-aged dad show, and I'm totally right there, And that show's interesting because he's not always a good guy, and that sort of moral ambiguity is interesting. I tend not to write that way at all. I like my main characters to be good guys that you can cheer for, and yeah. But yeah, I like that. I watch all kinds of other detective shows or cop shows or that kind of thing. I have read, Agatha Christie up to more recent stuff too.
Yeah, so Bosch, if you haven't read any of the novels, I highly recommend. I mean, the show's great. I love the actor whose name escapes me at the moment, who plays Bosch, but I've seen him in other things, but the novels are fantastic. And the Reacher, I love that the new TV show. We shall not speak of the Tom Cruise movie.
I found that.
But although they're entertaining, I give Tom Cruise that. He's entertaining.
Oh, yeah, they're fine movies, but they have nothing to do with the Reacher character.
And I love, I've only read, I think, maybe 2 of the Reacher novels. My mom is a big reader, and she gets literal grocery bags full of novels from one of my stepdad's sisters. And she works seasonally. So off season, she just pours through novels, and she had some of the Reacher I read. And it's good stuff. And like you said, he does have solved his mysteries with as Dukes. But no, he is a seasoned investigator too.
Yeah, the one thing I actually love about the TV shows compared to the books is in the books, you're always in Reacher's mind. Mm-hmm. So everything he's doing sort of makes sense. And on the show, he's third person, he's like, and so the other characters have a chance to say, "You're really weird, people are like this," which they do sometimes in the books, but he just shrugs it off because he's the narrator. But on the show, it's really funny to see them talk about how you only have one forever. That's really weird. And
I just love how they film the actor, because he's enormous, which is weird to say, because I'm actually a little bit taller than the actor is, and I don't feel like a big guy. I'm nowhere near as actually big as the actor is. But they always describe Reacher in the books as just this enormous force of nature.
Yeah,
and I love how in the TV series they play that up. That scene where he walks up to the car of this cop that's been following him, and he just mule kicks it, and the airbag deploys. That's hilarious. Reacher's a really good character, and I love when you get detectives that are more than just cerebral. As much as I love Poirot, for example, I also love also detectives that are a little more action oriented. So get to see a little fisticuffs, or like Sherlock Holmes. He had his action scenes from time to time. So it was fun to see.
Another author I really enjoy is Harlan Coben. Yeah, he earlier in his career wrote a whole bunch of sort of mystery thrillers where the main characters were not detectives. They were just regular folks, but something strange would start to happen to them. Sometimes something that seemed impossible. And then they would start to investigate and get involved in bigger issues that they had no idea were leaping out of the surface. And then more recently, he's done a whole bunch of British limited series detective shows I to watch. And he has a book with that sports agent, Milo Bolitor, I think his name is. I don't like those as much because you're kind of in with the same person all the time. And so a lot of my mysteries are actually that kind of thing with an amateur or just, a person that becomes sort of tangentially involved in something. And I really like that kind of story where it's a sort of a regular person or an everyman or whatever who's just,
the accidental
ends up wrong side of a bunch of things and has to figure stuff out. So, all 3 of the mysteries I've written so far are that way. The main characters are all different, but they're all basically trying to go about their own lives and then get entangled. And I really like that kind of set. So
that's kind of how my science fiction young adult series. The main character, Jane Dare, she's kind of an accidental detective. I'm kind of my Encyclopedia Brown in a sense. She's a kid, so obviously she doesn't have any formal education in that kind of thing, but she's a very bright kid. And so she...
I love the covers on that side. And am I right in thinking they're YA or middle grade or...
YA or if I guess an advanced middle grades reader would enjoy those. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I really, I always get asked by people who see just the cover, is it a comic book or graphic novel? And one day,
Yeah.
that's a villain for sure.
Yeah.
Because I can see the whole thing in my head, as a graphic novel. But yeah,
For me, a crummy like sci-fi channel movie.
oh,
That would be my pinnacle of having. I don't care if the movie's terrible. Just seeing my characters on the screen doing stuff.
that would be awesome too. Having a sci-fi movie, sci-fi channel movie would be a lot of fun.
Sure.
So you write in multiple genres. I see on your Amazon author.
Yeah, I think everyone tells you not to do that because it's very hard to establish a brand, and your also bots are all screwed up on Amazon and all of that. But I like different genres, and I have found myself sort of wanting to branch out from fantasy, which is what I did at first, and then sci-fi is sort of related to fantasy, although that they're both speculative and there's a lot of world building. But then I wanted to try the real world, and that's a very different sort of challenge. In fantasy and sci-fi, you get to make up the whole world, so you decide who lives there and how the society works and all of that. And that can be a lot of work, especially if you want it to make sense and be consistent and be deep. And in the real world, you don't have to do all that because the real world exists and people know how it is. But you also start to run into having to get everything right, even stuff that you don't really know about very much, because somebody's going to know if there's no sales tax in a particular state, or cell phone towers don't work that way, or a police officer wouldn't act this way, or a person charged with this crime. There's all sorts of detail. I had to do a lot of research on guns for one of my books because I have never shot a gun. But there were guns in the book. And so I had a friend who was in the Air Force and lives out in the edge of Wyoming and goes hunting all the time. He was a huge help in trying to get all that right. And I know that if I'd blown it, then that would have just been really obvious to anybody who knew anything who was reading. So yeah, the real world books are hard. I guess your horror ones don't have a little leeway because you can make up on some of the stuff that goes on. But
yeah, it all depends on how far you want to take the realistic aspects of it. I had to do, so I've got my supernatural detective, Esho St. Clair. I had to do a fair amount of research with the historical aspect of it. I wanted to, as I often say on this show and just in general, the more fantastical your elements are of story, the more realistic I want certain aspects to be to ground it so that the fantastic elements seem all that more fantastic. And so suspension of disbelief, I think, is a little bit easier when you have a really grounded sense of place or time, or both, if you're doing like a historical setting. So do you have a favorite part about researching for your books?
Oh, well, I really like running things by friends. I had a scene where a guy had been shot and somebody wanted to drop him off at the emergency room, and I was like, okay, well, how would that work? Would they take somebody who did a shot, or would the person be able to just drive away and leave? And what would that interaction be like? And so I got on Facebook and asked around for anybody who knew that kind of thing, was referred to kind of a friend who works in an ED, and she that heard our procedure, there would be a lockdown if there's a shooting, the police would be called, but honestly, you'd have a little bit of time, and the people at the hospital are not going to detain you, and so I got all of this, and what would be the procedure for getting somebody out of the back of a car? She was able to tell me how they, dip the gurney up and have a team sort of check them and then remove, so that was really cool to just have people out there who I didn't even know prior to this who were willing to tell me, what it's like for them. And then I can cross-reference that with other accounts on the internet and Reddit and that kind of thing, and some of them managing some of it. And I'm sure I screwed up various things as I go, but having that sort of person, I've consulted on a legal issue too, with a bunch of friends because I had a guy who got arrested, and I was like, well, how long is he going to stay there in jail? And, what's the bail process like? I had a short story set on a ship. And so I asked around in my college class. We have a pretty active Facebook group. If there are always sailors out there who can tell me, I wanted to have the ship be disabled and stuck on a reef, but have the tide come up and what would the ship, could the wind blow it off the reef? And so, yeah, that kind of thing is really fun when I'm actually talking to people. It's more fun, I think, just kind of a school later, out there in the library. So.
And you get, people love talking about what they do.
Yeah.
And so that passion can be a little infectious.
Yeah.
Lead over into your writing, I think. I wrote a short story for my collection at House of Phobos where I needed to consult a dentist on a really weird little short story that I wrote called Teeth, about this guy who all of a sudden had predatory teeth just start to grow in at random, like his natural teeth fell out and these predatory teeth grow in.
Oh, cool. Like,
he was being sort of possessed by these teeth. And so I had to ask the dentist some things about procedures.
Yeah.
And it was fun. Once my dentist, and it was my regular dentist, once she got over the weirdness of the concept, it was fun to talk about, the procedural stuff and to kind of check in that. Oh, that's okay. I love experiencing things like you're talking about guns earlier.
Yeah.
I'm not a big gun guy, but I love going to the shooting range or going shooting with friends and renting guns or borrowing guns and shooting them so that I know what it feels like, what it sounds like, what it smells like. Learning things like that, having excuses to learn things like that firsthand is always it's always a good excuse.
I probably should have done that, but I relied on my friend more for that. And it was really interesting because I had my main character, she was sort of a 40-ish woman who was a gas station clerk, and her husband was into guns, and so she had gone to ranges and shot and was familiar and was forced to use his guns. But I had her be very careful about constantly checking if the gun was loaded or not, and whether the safety was on it or not, because I was trying to imagine a person who was familiar but not steeped in it. And my friend said, no, you're doing that way too much. Somebody who's comfortable with them is going to know, and they're not going to worry about all these things constantly like you're having her do. And I thought that was certainly super helpful for me to figure out a mindset that I, or experienced and understand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that you can't get from like a short experience of firsthand experience. Something that only comes with long-term experience for sure. So it's always good to have people in your sphere of influence who can answer those kind of questions for you.
Right. Point out that you can be safe without obsessing over it, and I think I was putting my own I would be totally nervous having not much experience. So that was kind of eye-opening and really cool that I got that sort of insight from somebody who does different things with their weekends.
I am fortunate enough through some of my writing buddies to know a guy who does prosthetics for a living. And I had a question about, I had a character in a short story who got his leg amputated below the knee, and I had to figure out what that would be like in a late 19th century setting. And he was able to really talk me through some things like healing and pain level. And I fudged a little on the prosthetics because the tech level is a little higher in this setting than it would be in a real historical setting. But he was still able to give me some things. Some things don't change, no matter how high the tech level is. What pain's going to change, healing can change.
Yeah.
So it's good to have that, to have people that you can talk to, because I don't trust Reddit. I don't trust necessarily just search engines to give me a good answer. They can give me an answer, but if I talk to somebody, that's a little more trustworthy, I think.
Yeah.
And even then you might get something wrong, but at least you could say, hey, I talked to somebody. I'm comfortable that they were an expert. So let's go back to writing multiple genres. You touched a little bit on some of the challenges of writing multiple genres, brand identification, things like that. What are some of the disadvantages? What are some of the advantages you think that exist in, or at least some of the things you enjoy in genres?
Well, for me, it keeps it sort of fresh, because I've been doing a couple books a year, and I think, if I was trying to do them all fantasy or all sci-fi or something like that, I think I might stall out or go more slowly. And so I think having the ability to kind of take a breath and say, okay, I'm going to do something different now for the next few months is really helpful. And then having different sorts of challenges to work through, with fantasy or sci-fi, I usually have magic or advanced technology or aliens or something. And that lets you kind of, your creativity just go everywhere. And you have to balance these weird supernatural elements that you're putting in with humanity and trying to make a good story. It's not just about the weirdness. And then with the contemporary stories, you get a chance to kind of think about how people live their lives and what places they might find that are enjoyable or peaceful or happy versus where they're going to get stuck in what they're doing with constraints, time or money or family or that kind of thing. Now, ideally, you'd be doing that kind of thing in fantasy and sci-fi too, but because you have all these other things going on, you don't get to focus on that. And so with my mysteries, I had more sort of family dynamics that I have put in with the others. And that's kind of a fun thing to think about, work with.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I like the ability to, I even do it like I'm the kind of guy who works on multiple projects at once in my writing, and I'm kind of a mood writer. So sometimes I feel like working on one of my horror projects, or sometimes I feel like working on something more science fiction-y. So it's nice to be able to switch gears kind of on the fly. But I think even if I worked on one project at a time, it would be nice to have that ability to go back and forth between different things.
Yeah, I can't jump back and forth on a day-to-day basis. I can work on, or I just stuck to everything done. I even tried to edit one book while continuing doing daily writing on another, and I completely collapsed if I try to do that. So I kind of need to have one thing at a time going on where I get confused. Now, I do switch what that one thing is, but it takes me a few days to sort of stay up and get in the mood and start thinking. I do my best writing when I'm writing every day. And then I write for a couple of hours, which, isn't that much in terms of a whole day's worth of time, but that's about the most I can buffer up what's going to happen. And then I need to kind of not write and fill up that buffer again of what's next. So I don't usually write from an outline. So I'm more of a fantasy of the pants or discovery writer. And so it takes a little bit of time to think about what's that next scene going to be, or at least how is it going to start. And then when I write it, it can take shape.
I see.
Yeah,
that makes sense. I'm not out here claiming that my approach makes me a whole lot more productive. I'm sure it could take me a long time to get some things out into the public sphere. In fact, the last thing I published, long form published, was pre-COVID. So it's been a while, but that's going to be changing very soon. So part of the reason why I took a long time off, but yeah, for sure. Part of me too is I love short stories because and that's why I say it a lot. The last thing I published that was long form was that long ago, but I've written a lot of short stories over the last year because
that's apology. You're about this.
Yeah, that's kind of where my passion is, but short stories aren't necessarily what people are out there wanting to read. There's a lot more what novels. So I've got a couple of, my hope is to have in 2026, have 2 novels. So, fingers crossed, that's the plan. To change gears a little bit, you have at least 1 or 2 series that I saw. You said you're a pantser, and I go back and forth. I outline my novels generally and pants my short stories. How do you approach writing a series? Do you still kind of pants the arc of a series, or do you have an idea of where that arc of a series is?
I handle that by avoiding it. My stance is the fantasy detective ones I was telling you about, and they're actually, the thing that unifies them is they're all in the same city, and they're with the Inquisitors Guild, which is this detective sort of branch of government. They have the city guard does some of the policing, and then the Inquisitors Guild are the people who sort of figure out mysteries or crimes or that kind of thing.
Okay.
But each book has a different narrator, a different member of the guild, and each story is a self-contained mystery. So over the course of the 4 books, you see things still, and the government sort of changes from the prequel into the end, and you learn more about different aspects of the society. But I haven't had to think about what's the bigger arc or anything like that, because I don't like books that I read them and they just sort of end, and you have to wait until the next one comes out to figure out what's going to happen. I'm much more like writing sort of self-contained ones. And I thought about having the same detectives in each book, just with a new case or something like that. But then I also ran into what I call the Die Hard 2 problem. Like in Die Hard 1, you can believe that John McClane has, this remarkable event and ends up caught up in the terrorist attack. But is he really going to end up on a plane with another bunch of terrorists in Die Hard 2? So I didn't want my characters to have this sort of highly unlikely series of big events. So.
Right.
Yeah.
I was searching there for there's a series, it's a science fiction / fantasy series that does something fairly similar with having a different character in each book.
Yeah.
That's a neat approach.
Yeah.
The only downside I could see is sometimes I get really attached to a certain character.
Yeah.
And then that does happen for other readers.
Yeah.
But I think that's really cool.
Yeah. In my first book to the first book was basically, it was told from the perspective of one character, but he had a partner. He was a little scrawny guy who was kind of good at magic and was a little sort of full of self-doubt because they're both new Inquisitors just graduated from the apprenticeship program. And his partner is this massive, sort of very confident guy who's less good at magic, but he's also, he's not big and stupid. He's got a sharp mind, but he's just a totally different guy from the kind of scrawnier guy. And so in the second book, I had that guy be the main character because I liked his interactions with my first main character. And then the third book, there's a sort of a foil to them in the first 2 books, is this sort of obnoxious rich guy who has joined the guild, even though he kind of doesn't need to. And he has a good heart, but he's just obnoxious to everyone. And so in the third book, I thought, well, I could try writing with him as a main character and figure out how he works. And so that was, so that's fun. I don't have to start totally new. I have been picking characters that or at least are present in the other books, and then writing from their perspectives. And then I always have the characters you've met before show up in various roles in the later ones. So it's not that they're completely abandoned. I still get to write about them. I just don't have their, don't have them be the point of character.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So one of the things that I noticed as I was looking at your Amazon page was you tend to do some books with some humor attached to them. Like I was I'm pulling a lot of humorous vibes from the glorious and epic tale,
Right.
Lady Isovar.
Yes, that one, that's one of my favorite ones. I set out to write one that all of my books try to be funny, and my kids will tell you that that's basically me in a nutshell, is trying to be funny. So they all try to be funny, although also serious and with the story that kind of matters. I kind of imagine Princess Bride as my sort of goal, to have some silliness, but also, heart and the story that you care about. With Lady Isovar, I wanted to go more towards the silly end of things. And so she's this enormous, strong, powerful lady knight who is completely fixated on the idea of reputation, honor, valiant deeds, and all of that. So she's out in the world looking for miscreants. She talks about miscreants all the time to defeat, to bring justice to. And she's got this squire. And so the chapters alternate between Lady Isovar's perspective, which is this totally focused on her own image, and her squire, who's basically trying to get her not to kill anyone who's innocent. And because is off misinterpreting things, he's there, and he's got a series of vows that he's made her swear, because he's convinced her that swearing vows is something that knights do. And so he's convinced her that it would be merciful not to vow not to kill anyone on a Thursday. And so she's taken this vow. And so people frequently tell her it's Thursday because she doesn't really keep track of what they've done. So they have this relationship where he's basically trying to manage her, point her at actual bad guys and away from anybody that she misinterprets. And they have, I really enjoyed running their series of adventures. I modeled after, I took a course in college called the Medieval Court that looked at a whole bunch of the kind of romantic poetry and sagas and stuff that emerged from Europe's medieval courts. So, the King Arthur tales and the Tristan and Isolde and that kind of thing. And so I wanted to write something like that. So they're all on the road and they have an adventure where there's travel and they meet different kind of people as they go. There's a bigger story too that gradually becomes clear because Shevson the Squire is trying to steer her towards a place he wants to get to. And you eventually figure out kind of how they came together and what matters to them and all of that. But the story is very much sort of going along and finding some new thing that they can fix. A little bit like The Mandalorian, I guess, where, he walks into a new town and there's something going on. And so they end up in different situations. They find a necromancer who's creating an undead army and an evil empress and all kinds of stuff. So it's written that way as kind of a journey. A couple of people have mentioned Cervantes and Don Quixote, and it has that kind of vibe with a knight and a squire, except that Don Quixote wasn't really competent. He kind of imagined himself to be a knight and wasn't. And Lady Isovar, or Izzy, as Jefferson Owen calls it, is actually just tremendously competent, but not at all good at planning or thinking or interpreting. And so, as she will say, just ridiculous things all the time, but she's actually very crafty also. If it relates to fighting in combat, she knows exactly how to defeat anybody, and she is brave and heck and all of that. But yeah, so that one I had a ton of fun writing.
Have you ever played any D&D?
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay. So I'm developing a bingo card and for the show, and that D&D is going to be one of the spots.
Bingo squares. Yeah. No, I played before it was advanced. My first set was I keep on ordering. They go on my shelf over there.
That's right.
Cool.
Right.
Red Box, Team Red Box.
Yeah.
We so basically the trope of the dumb paladin is strong in this one. Really very competent, very good at what they do, but not so bright. And that's it's certainly not original at all. I mean, the tick is doing that all over the place. But yeah, I really enjoyed trying to figure out how that worked and trying to be a little funnier, a little zanier, because of the detective stories.
they say and do funny things, but the encounters aren't set up for jokes. In Lazy Isobar, sometimes the encounters actually are there because it would be really funny to see what she does in that situation, as opposed to she has a dragon that she wants to ride, and the dragon is not going to let her ride.
I'm also getting like vibes of Gru.
Yeah, there's some of that too. Yeah.
I'm glad you got the reference.
Oh, Sergio Aragonés.
So imagine my surprise when I go to read your bio on your website and find out that you have done stand-up.
Yes, I do more improv than stand-up, but I have done some stand-up. But I've been doing improv at a local comedy club it'll be 20 years in January since I started.
So did that come out of your writing? Is that related to your desire? Is that related to your writing in any way? Is that just another aspect of your creative spirit? How did that evolve?
Well, so I think they're all related. I started my first novel around the same time as I started improv. But improv is also very much Dungeons and Dragons. You end up in prompt and you're trying to figure out what to say as a character. And, there's a lot of overlap in terms of D&D, a good D&D session and an improv game. Obviously, in D&D, you're having an adventure and there are other players and, a dungeon master, all that kind of thing. But then when I started writing, it was very natural from improv and D&D to write in the sort of seat of the pants style, as opposed to outlining, because I was already used to, okay, here's what's just happened. What is the character going to do or say, or what's the natural reaction to that? And so all of my dialogue is written kind of like an improv scene, where each character says something, establishes something, the other characters react. And so I feel like that has really helped me with dialogue and with characters that aren't having to do stuff because of the plot, but instead having the plot develop based on natural reactions from what they decide or choose. And it also is refreshing because I will sometimes, part of improv is making offers where you just create something in the world that then is part of the world and people have to deal with it. So I will sometimes write a chapter without knowing how it's going to end and then throw in a twist sort of at the end that I didn't see coming and don't have an explanation for. And then in the next couple of chapters, I have to figure out who was that person who jumped out of the window as they entered the room, or what does it mean that the bell tower caught fire as they were walking towards it? And, I will often not know the answer, something that I have just done, and then have to sort of figure out how that fits in. And then, when I go through editing, some of the stuff doesn't fit, and I've done something stupid and have to take it out. But yeah, that's actually a really fun way for me to write, and I think it does completely translate to how a D&D campaign works, and also especially to how improv works, because you started seeing basically either saying something or listening to what the other person says, and you don't know where you are, who you are, how you're related, any of that kind of stuff. And so that fits my writing style really well. And then obviously improv, you're usually trying to be funny and come up with clever and unexpected things to say. But the characters in the scene, that's one thing you learn in improv that's not obvious when you start, is that it's not actually about trying to be funny. It's about trying to be a good character that relates well to other people. And so that's also something that helps when you're writing. In stand-up, the different kind of thing entirely. Stand-up, you're actually writing a story that will be funny, and it might be a very short set of jokes, or it might be a longer story that you kind of work through over a couple of minutes. But that's also very much storytelling and finding comedic beats that build on each other and get you to somewhere where there's a punchline or a bigger joke at the end. That's all of the stand-up, that's not just sort of really short one-liners, does that sort of storytelling and gets you to something that's worthwhile. So yeah, I'm not nearly as good at stand as I hope that I am at improv. I find it a lot harder. one thing with stand-up is if you go up there, you're the only person on stage, and you are being prepared to really great stand-up comedians, because everybody's seen good stand-up. And so the expectations on you are very high if you go up to do stand-up. And there's no one who can save you. Whereas if you're doing improv, the expectation of the people in the room who just shouted out hot dogs, that you're going to be able to do anything at all to make something funny, those expectations are very low. And so it's very easy to come up with something really fun that they didn't expect. And, so yeah, that's the joy of improv. It doesn't have to be great. It just has to be better than what people expected you could do. and then it can be a fun time.
So it sounds like I need to take an improv class.
Oh, I would suggest that to anyone. They're fun. Now, a lot of people think it's scary, but once you realize that everybody is up there trying to help you and that the stakes of failing aren't that high. So you do a stupid thing, didn't end up going anywhere, or say you said that you were in a Walmart and somebody else says you're in the jungle, and so your reality gets broken. I mean, it's over in 2 or 3 minutes. You're not going to do any permanent damage to anyone that way. So, yeah, but it's great for thinking on your feet and for coming up with characters and interesting responses. I would suggest it to writers for sure. They help me as a teacher also try to be quicker to respond to students and think of funny things to say during lectures and that kind of thing.
Oh, I bet. Something else I also discovered about you while I was reading your bio was that you have created some video games.
Yeah, that's right. The most successful one, the biggest one by far, was which was a puzzle game that came out in 1996 and got pretty big. It's interesting talking about it because the people who were around then and remember it think, oh yeah, that was pretty cool. And most people today are like, I don't have any idea what you're talking about. But I was eventually downloaded hundreds of millions of times. And it showed up on The Sopranos. There was a little episode of The Sopranos where a guy was sort of addicted to things, and one of the things he was addicted to is Snood. It's been on Saturday Night Live a couple of times. Lorne Michaels loves Snood. He's actually had me make him a personal version of it because he didn't like the newer version that the company was making. So yeah, that was weird. It was a shareware game or just a puzzle game. You've probably played games like it since then. And it just sort of started to go viral in the early internet because I put it on my student page. I was in grad school at the University of Michigan, and they gave you a little 5 megabyte web base. And so I put it up there, and it jumped around to college campuses primarily initially because everybody on college campuses at those days had the web, which was pretty new back in 1996 or so. And people at home, some of them had, dial-up, but there wasn't nearly as much web activity now as everybody has. But yeah, that was really great. It was, it's weird to have the most famous, most impactful thing you've ever done happen when you're, 28.
Right.
It's not bad to go through the rest of your life failing to meet that standard. But yeah, it's, that was a really cool time in my life. I got myself bought out of the company in 2009, and it's still around, but I'm not affiliated with it anymore. But yeah, it was huge for a while. I got written up in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and then this was back when newspapers mattered more. And then that story got carried by a whole bunch of other papers, and that's when it really took off because people saw it in their local paper and downloaded it. Yeah.
Any interest in helping to develop video games based on your literary works?
Oh, that would be very cool. I got a gig with a British company where I was writing stories. So they had I can't talk a ton about it because I'm NDA, but they have a game that's a space adventure. And I was writing some of the plot lines for the various factions that you made. It's not been published yet, but that was really cool because I got the chance to apply the sort of writing skills that I developed into something that was going to become part of what they were doing. I hope to see it come out soon, but that was fun. I still do, I do game jams a couple times a year, and I come up with a couple of little JavaScript web-based games. I do a lot of tabletop games also. I put out a set of puzzle card games, Dr. S. Change Notebook, that are kind of like escape rooms in a little deck of cards. I got, one of them here. So I've got 4 of those out, and that's been fun. So yeah, I guess I've always, and my whole life is a story of kind of half-assing a lot of things. And so now I've turned that half-assing to writing and seeing how that's going. Yeah. So yeah, it's been fun just trying to find ways to amuse myself and hopefully entertain some other folks that way.
Well, it doesn't feel like half-assing to have such a popular video game and to
Sure. Well,
and to do all of these other things. I guess for me, what I always try to keep perspective is how do I define success?
yeah.
And I always find that it is a trap that we are prone to putting ourselves in because of the capitalist society that we live in. Probably wrong. I like capitalism. Okay. It's got its pitfalls, but that said is just every other form of economy and government. But you and I have both done these things, books, created various other things that nobody else has done. And that people say, oh, I'm going to do this thing. Or they start it, never finish it. But we have started it, finished it, done that whole thing all over again and again. And one of the things that I wanted to do by starting this podcast is highlight people who are creative dynamos in the sense that they have iterated. They have created whatever it is they create. So far, it's mostly been writers. But one of the things that I appreciate about you and people like you is they have done multiple formats. They've created multiple kinds of things. Writing is just communicate. And so are the other forms of storytelling that you've done, like improv and video games and stand-up, as you pointed out. But they are different enough skill sets, writing fiction and creating games, and telling jokes, and doing improv, that yeah, you're a multi-format, I suppose, put it that way, creator. And so yeah, that's encouraging to me. I think it would be encouraging. I hope it would be encouraging to our listeners to get outside your comfort zone, make things other than things that you're comfortable making. Like, I'm comfortable creating short stories and novels. I am semi-comfortable getting on stage, but I've never got on stage and told jokes. I've never got on stage to do improv. Well, kind of briefly in high school, because we had a theater program and I did some theater in high school, but not really. I didn't do improv in front of other people. I did improv with this little theater class that I was part of in high school for a semester. But it would be fun to do improv, I think.
You're so right about the sort of, not necessarily problems with capitalism, but the fact that's the frame that gets put around all of these things that we do, or not all of them, but many of them. Like improv I've done, and it's been this fulfilling part of my life for 2 decades now. And I have never worried about whether it makes money or not. The club that I'm at, I want them to succeed. And obviously, if nobody comes to your show, that sucks. But and then I've done community theater. I started that up a couple of years ago, and a couple of smaller parts and comedies. And yeah, there's a business frame on it because you sell tickets, but it's much more important that you're doing it and that people are laughing and having a good time, and you want to cover costs. But you don't need the play to be a major industrial success that you get those stocks in. And, Snood was that. I think we got to the point where I think the company, I eventually got a business partner because I couldn't do my professor job and still run it. And so I became just the programmer and technical guy. But the company ended up making $9 million or something over the course of the thing, only a fraction of which I got. But it was a huge success. And my little puzzle card games have made like $20,000 or $30,000. And my books are the thing I'm most passionate about right now. And I lose about $4,000 a year on them. And so it took me a while to kind of think, that's not a success because I'm losing money. And, to some extent that's true. If I wanted to support myself and pay my mortgage and, not have to work another job, this would be a very bad way to accomplish those goals. But in terms of a creative outlet, if I think about it more like the Improv or the community theater or D&D or marching band or the other kinds of things that I've really enjoyed being creative and hanging out with people, it's totally a success in that kind of circumstance. And for me, it's always been about finding more readers, sharing it with more people. And I realize the privilege that I have enough money to kind of to do this and spend time on it, even though it's not a huge money-making part of that. My wife had a good job with health insurance. So I have some savings, so I'm working okay on that kind of thing. But yeah, it's hard when you frame it. Like if I wanted to make money, I could write a whole bunch of romance novels and probably do better than I am now. Given the success and the good reviews I've got with these, if I sort of chased the market more and didn't necessarily write what I wanted to write, I probably would have a better shot at turning it into a financially viable sort of thing to do. And I may get there. That's the hope that eventually attract enough attention that the money I'm spending on covers and editing and advertising is recouped at least by the book sales. But it's okay if it's not for now, as long as I can keep food on the table. And, the fact that one of my books has, I think most reviewed book has about 700 and some reviews. That means and you figure not everybody reviews, and I've reached an audience with that, and I'm finding an audience with some of the other stuff too. And that's the important part, and the part that I am trying to shift my sort of goal setting to, as opposed to, it would be great if these made a profit in a year. So yeah, I don't know. But it is, everybody thinks about things as whether this makes money or not. And I don't know that this has to, at least for me and now. And I started, all of these things that I've done that I've started this way, that have been my creative outlets, have been when I should have been doing something else. So like I wrote Snared in grad school and I should have been swirling mud, learning more about the paleoclimate of the late Cretaceous. And when I was teaching at Guilford, I should have been doing more grading and more academic research and that kind of thing. But instead I was making puzzle card games and writing books. So this stuff is always what I kind of wanted to do. And so I'm trying to have a life now that I've left teaching that's more on the things that I want to do and less on the things that everybody else is expecting me to do. So that's, that's a lot of fun and something I probably should have figured out earlier.
The beautiful thing is you're here now and you're doing it now. And I tell people all the time who tell me, man, I wish I could do what you're doing, or oh man, I wish I could write a book. I'm like, you can. Just, don't wait until you're retired. Don't wait until whatever it is you're waiting for, because that magic day is never going to arrive.
Yeah.
You start doing it now, it's going to suck for a long time, and it's going to get better at some point. And if you wait until you're retired or whatever, then you're probably going to be dead before it's good. So you start now, it might be good by the time you retire. Start now.
You learn so much by doing it too,
Oh, good Lord. Yes.
That's why I think my first book really benefited from the 14 years that I kind of spent writing it and revising it. And I haven't had that much time on the other books. Most of them I do in a year or two. but that learning how to make a plot, how to think about characters, just the craft parts, but also the kind of design and narrative and all of that. It just takes doing it. I think Mike Birbiglia talked about how nobody wants to go see your first stand-up because you're going to be terrible at it. And you have to spend time sucking
Yep.
at something.
Ira Glass said something very similar.
Yeah. Yes.
Quite a while ago about, letting yourself.
Yeah.
And
Probably. Right. I watched a lot of bad improv, and I have done a lot of bad improv. That's just part of growing into getting a little better at it.
Dave, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I really enjoyed it.
Let our audience know where they can find you.
Okay. My website is davedobsonbooks.com for the books, and my card games and other game stuff are on planktongames.com. I'm a marine geologist, so plankton was a big part of my research. So those are my two main websites, and I'm on all this social media. You can find me pretty easily there too.
Fantastic. I appreciate your time. And
thanks so much for inviting me. It's really cool.
absolutely.